it was a bit of a complex surgery in that they had to effectively take out the stuff that was there before. So you have screws and the ACL and all that kind of stuff. They had to take the screws out. They had to take bone from my femur, block up those old tunnels that were in there, and then put in a new ACL using my right hamstrings. This time, for my third time round, they weren't able to use my own hamstrings, which is what they would normally do for an ACL reconstruction. They actually have used a donor graft.
Hey, welcome to the Bodies Built Better podcast. I'm your host, Jackie Tan. And if you're joining me for the very first time, welcome. Thank you so much for being here. And if you are back, thank you. I appreciate you and all your support. This show is all about human performance. I created this show because I really want to help you be able to perform at your best, whatever that looks like for wherever that is for you. I chat with athletes, health experts, doctors, scientists, and so many more on the best tips, tools, and strategies to help you perform at your best and discover your extraordinary potential, because I truly believe we all have an untapped potential within us, and whether we are afraid to tap into that, or we don't know how to tap into that, or we don't even know that it's there, I want to make sure that you are able to discover that, uncover that, work with that, and perform at your best and be the most extraordinary person that you are. And before we get into today's episode, I wanted to share a story with you, because for me, this is something that was so, you would probably term as something little, but had such a profound and wonderful impact on me and my day. And I feel like, if we can share that with others, then hopefully we can start to make, an impact on everyone else's day. The thing is, it was so small, it doesn't take much. So here's the story. So I'm in the city, I'm in Adelaide. I was in the city and I decided to grab a coffee and went to a cafe that I haven't been to in a very long time. So once upon a time, going back maybe 4 or 5 years ago, I would frequent this cafe. And when I say frequent, I was there every morning getting the same coffee before work. And of course, when you see the same people every day, they get to know you, they get to know your name and your order. And so it was really wonderful. It was a great cafe. And I haven't, it's been 4 or 5 years. So this particular morning I walk in, it's really busy, and I walk to the counter, and one of the staff he's dealing with, some customers, and then, directing them where to go to order their coffee, whether it's takeaway or having in. And he then shouts over to me or my direction, and I didn't quite hear him. I didn't know if he's talking to me. I'm looking over my shoulder. Is he talking to me? Anyway, so I figure he is. So I walk over to him and he said, "Oh, you takeaway or dining in?" To which I said, "I'm dining in today." And he's like, "Oh, great. Take a seat. I'll come to you. It's table service. I'll bring you some menus." And so I sit down, brings over the menus, and he goes, "Sorry, did I get your name wrong?" Now, I didn't hear what he'd said. And so I was like, when he'd called over to me. And so I must have had this really confused look on my face, because I was like, did he say my name? Is that what he'd said to me? I thought he was just calling me over. Anyway, so whenever I'm thinking, I have a look, apparently. I don't know if my brain is trying to figure something out or if I'm confused. You can see it on my face. It's very obvious, apparently. To which he then went, "Oh, sorry, you look like someone I know. I'm sorry if I got you confused with someone." And that's when I actually truly looked at him, and I was like, "Actually, you look familiar too." And he goes to me, "You used to come here, right? Like a few years ago now." And I said, "Yeah, I did." Because again, I'm in shock. I'm like, why don't I remember you? Anyway, so I order my food comes, which was delicious, by the way, and the coffee was delicious. For all the Adelaideans, I'll tell you which cafe it was in a moment. And so whilst I'm eating my food, I'm like, did he actually say my name though? Or just does he think I'm someone else? I was in doubt. And so this was really playing on me. So I decided then and there that I was going to go up to him and ask him, what do you think my name is? Maybe not in those words. But anyway, so I finish my food, I go and pay. And at this point, he's in like the corner of the cafe eating his breakfast on his break. And I'm like, ugh. The old Jackie would go, oh, I'll just leave it. He's having breakfast. It doesn't matter anyway. But I just thought, if he did remember my name, I think it's so incredible and so lovely a gesture. I just think it was, if he did remember, I wanted to thank him. Like, I really appreciate that. Anyway, so I decided to interrupt him and his breakfast. And I go over and I say, when you said my name when I walked in? Question mark. He goes, yeah, Jackie. Like, oh gosh, when I'm in shock or surprise, I don't actually know what comes out my mouth, or it's never planned, and I'm not proud of this moment. But when he said that, I'm like, fuck off. Apologies if you're averse to swearing. I was just in shock. I'm like, so what's your name? And he shows me his badge, to which and tells me it's Ocean. And that's when it all clicked, because obviously that name is quite unusual. Not so much unusual. It's not common, right? So when I heard it, I'm like, oh, the memories came flooding back. Of course. And I said, look, I just want to say thank you. And I really appreciate you, even remembering my name. That's all I wanted to say. And he said, no worries. You have a good day. And I said, you too. And I walked off. And I just thought, that's such a small gesture, or just a small interaction, and yet it had such a positive influence on me in that moment, and then me for the rest of the day. And I just think if we can have that small impact on everyone we come in contact with, how much of a better place we could be in, and how many beautiful moments we could create with people, and really valuable or beautiful connections we can make just by one simple thing, whether it is remembering a name, whether it is actually just looking at someone when you're talking to them or saying hi to them. It's the small things that really count. So I encourage you to do something small and see how big it turns out to be for someone else. But now with that, I want to get into this incredible episode with a past client turned friend. She's a neuro physiotherapist and an incredible athlete. And I know she would probably cringe when she hears me say that, but she's an athlete and she's incredible at what she does. Her name is Eileen Ting. We have an incredible conversation. Eileen has been through 3 ACL reconstructions. So this third one is most recent. She's dealing with it at the moment. And if you're watching this on YouTube, you'll see the brace on her knee. So we talk about, I guess, the challenges and obstacles around injury, especially when it takes you away from the thing that you really love doing, the thing that is so much a part of your routine in your life, and the way you go about, every day. It's part of your routine. So to be able to move through an injury that I guess is a setback, and this particular one is because it is her third one, and you'll hear why it's so significant in her life and her rehab and the way she's going about her movement, but also obviously the mindset and the psychology around injuries. And we talk about the way she's dealt with it in the past. She's not quite happy with, and the changes she's making to deal with this injury this time round much better. We also talk about her incredible adventures. She's an incredible storyteller, and she tells a story of a hike in New Zealand, which just, I mean, it blows my mind. I love hearing this story. And when I was editing it, I would hearing it again and again. It's so incredible. And I can't wait for all of you to hear this story. And if you're an adventure or hike enthusiast, you're going to love this. So stay tuned for that. And then, of course, we talk about her new love of bouldering. I love how she got into it. I love the story around this. And she's someone who, when puts her mind to something or decides to do something, her work ethic is through the roof. She's just incredible at what she does. She sets high standards for herself, which I'm truly inspired by. So this is an incredible conversation. We're mates, so there's no formal introduction. You'll hear we just get straight into it. We're talking. It's mid conversation. It's an interesting one because everything that I've just mentioned, how incredible she is, and how strong and resilient, and quite a good athlete, and yet her mindset around that is not one that I thought would be where it's at. So it's a really interesting conversation. And I know that, it will definitely resonate with a lot of people, because sometimes, for whatever reason, our self-worth and value, isn't where it should be. We deserve to be seeing ourselves in the light that everyone else sees us in. So without further ado, this is an awesome conversation. Enjoy this one with Eileen Ting.
Yeah, there's lots of things that I've done, but I've never felt necessarily like extraordinary at any of those things. I just feel like I've done them and I've survived them.
Yeah.
And like I said to you, it's about I feel like a lot of those times I've made lots of mistakes. Sometimes I've, felt like I've been dragged kicking and screaming through the mud by other people who've been there for me. Yeah. And I've popped out the other end and gone, holy shit, that was intense. So
what do you classify or think an athlete is? What would you deem someone to call them an athlete?
Yeah.
What do they need to be doing?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I feel like I'm a lover of sport.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like I'm a lover of sport. I'm an enthusiast. I'm a hobbyist. That's
right.
How I feel, and I feel very passionately about those sports. And I have worked hard at them. But yeah, I suppose that's a good question, because I've never actually considered myself. I've never considered myself an athlete. Yeah, I can consider myself like an enthusiast of those sports.
Yeah. So to you, an athlete is someone who's elite.
I think that is I think that is what I've been conditioned to think. Yeah. But certainly when you put it like that, I think of a lot of people in my life who sports are a really central part of their own identity, and they themselves would consider themselves athletes. But it's interesting because I feel like, despite that there's probably for me been that conflicting idea of elitism versus just being a lover and, having a passion for it.
That's such an interesting outlook, especially for someone like you who is actually a high achiever and strives to get the best from themselves, from yourself. And so I'm confused by that mindset coming from someone like you who achieves quite a high level of success, depending on what your definition of success is. But, from an outsider's perspective, you do so well. Like, yes, you're a hobbyist, but anything that you do that you love, you do really bloody well, and you work hard for it.
Yes, I do work. Yes, I certainly can't deny that. I think I have an intense fear of being, and this might be flawed. This probably is flawed, but I think I've always had this intense fear, and also have been conditioned to try to be humble, and I'm still learning what that means also. So I think, first of all, I find it hard to take a compliment. But I also really respect, I think, that I have lots of weaknesses.
Okay.
Yeah.
As we all do.
Yeah. So I think I respect a lot that I have a lot of weaknesses and things that I need to work on, certainly not just physically, but with my internal dialogue as well.
Mm-hmm.
And I think when we have chatted about and what I initially and have felt reluctant about coming on here and feeling worthy to come on here, because I respect your opinion so much, is that through this whole process of my sports, and importantly getting through the injuries that I've had, that I've gone through, is I respect that, like, I have observed that my internal dialogue at times is something that I really need to work on. There have been times that have been so hard through injuries, and even through getting and like participating in these sports, where I've not been someone that I'm proud of. And I've said to you that I feel like sometimes I've gotten through adversity, but not as gracefully as I would have liked to, looking back on those experiences. And I do hope that, like, I've learnt from those experiences. I do feel like I have. But it's what I said about, feeling like I've just survived. And at times, I've needed so much help to get to where I am. And I still have such a long way to go. I feel extremely imperfect. And I appreciate that, we all are. But I do feel extremely imperfect in those ways, and still am, struggling and learning how to get through that and process the internal dialogue that is unhelpful or is quite negative. And that's still a process. That's still a process for me. So I think of all the inspiring people that you've had on this show, and people that I see as conventionally inspiring. And I think to myself, there are times where I don't feel like that. I don't feel conventionally inspiring, because there are days that are, thankfully not now, but back when I struggled through the initial knee rehab, that, the best I could do when I couldn't see any hope for the future, the best I could do was just wake up in the mornings.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I promise I won't cry. I will try.
You can if you like.
But yeah. So that's, I suppose, what I mean by feeling ordinary. Like, I do feel like I am average, and at best sometimes, less than average, in the ways that I have, the ways that I have dealt with challenges, and I am still learning. Yeah, I am still learning.
We are all and forever will be learning.
Indeed.
And it is always a process. And there's so much in that. Firstly, the worthiness piece. Like, in terms of when you look at the people that I've interviewed, whilst you may think, and, I have spoken to extraordinary people, but that's not to say they're extraordinary because they're athletes.
Yeah, very true. Yeah.
So, and it's a crazy thing because you
Very
also
true.
say, you know, that you haven't been proud of the way you've dealt with things. And I mean, who can say they're 100% proud of every single moment that they've been through, especially when dealing with adversity, challenge, obstacles, and something for you where training, whether it's trail running, hiking, crazy adventure sports that you love doing, or bouldering, which is something that you've recently started, you know, despite whatever it is you're going through, how can we ever say that, you know, I dealt with that challenge really well. That was top notch. That like what does gracefully even mean? Like how, if you were to look back at those times where you go, that could have been more graceful, what does that mean to, what would that look like for you?
Yeah. You're right. I mean, I think there's a saying, if you act abnormally in an abnormal situation, that's normal. And so, yeah, I mean, that is, you know, I do appreciate that. Having had the years between the first injury and now this one, and now having so many more resources than I did back then, I feel like I can say that at the very least, I have the resources to approach this differently to how I did before. And so I do have to step back and try not to be too judgmental of who I was back then. But I certainly have, I feel like in terms of getting through this in a way that's less destructive, perhaps is what I is probably more accurate, perhaps, because I look back at the dialogue and the depression that I spiraled into in those years because of the lack of resources and because I didn't know what to do, compared to now. And I feel like I have the resources, and I'm deliberately choosing not to be as destructive as I was and to be constructive this time, and to actually use the resources that I have available, not to let things pan out how they did the last time, or at least put in the stops or put in the checks as best as I can in what is in my control to make this a better experience than it did all those years ago.
Yeah.
So I suppose that's probably what I mean by more graceful.
So with the first injury, and we'll explain in a moment exactly your injuries. You said that you didn't have the resources then that you do now. So when you look back on it, do you feel like you did your best with what you had at the time?
Yeah, and I mean, the best I had was, as I said, some days just waking up and just, you know, getting through the day. I didn't know what I didn't know, I suppose.
Exactly,
I didn't know what I didn't know. And so I didn't have as much kind of professional help, both physically and psychologically. So I didn't know, or certainly didn't know how to access them. We got through it. Yeah, we got through it the best we could at the time.
Exactly.
Yeah, exactly.
That's something that I've learnt from. Actually, I remember having this conversation with a client.
Yeah.
When I was talking about retiring from massage, and you know, he was saying, "Well, how do you feel about it?" And when you look back on everything, how do you feel? And
Yeah.
and I said that I was a little disappointed because I feel like I have or had so much potential, and I never got to that point, and I feel like to some degree it was a waste. And he said, well, none of it is ever a waste because you did the best with the resources you had at the time. And that for me was a really nice,
liberating.
Yeah.
And can I just put up my hand and say, you was not a waste. you. I feel like it was certainly not a waste. From an individual who was on the receiving end of your extraordinary skills and your coaching and everything.
Yeah.
It was not a waste.
I appreciate that. Not about me though.
Okay.
Let's give listeners an hour in some context.
There's a lot that happened to get here this morning.
Exactly. It's a miracle or even recording. So if you're able to watch this on YouTube, you'll see that Eileen has brace on the knee because it even lifts it up. Had surgery
a couple of weeks ago
on
so I had a right ACL reconstruction, as well as a meniscal repair as well, which means, so with the meniscal repair, it means that I have to be non-weight bearing, so not putting any weight on the leg for up to kind of 4 to 6 weeks or so to let the cartilage heal. So that's unconventional for just a pure ACL reconstruction. Usually with an ACL reconstruction, you should be up and moving ASAP. So that has definitely been like a bit of that's been a different challenge this time to the first time. My armpits are very sore. Crutches. But we're effectively a third of the way through the non-weight bearing side of things. So fingers crossed that the cartilage heals is kind of but that is out of our control. We're just waiting for that. So
to give everyone some context as to the type of athlete you are, let's go way back when I first met you as you actually injured.
I was.
You were recovering from ACL.
Yeah, that was, I think I saw you not too long after. So after I'd had my second, so I'd had a revision surgery. So I had done my left ACL back, I think, 2014, and then that graft failed after about 6 to 9 months, and then we had to go back into surgery. Had a different surgeon. It was a bit of a complex surgery in that they had to effectively take out the stuff that was there before. So you have screws and the ACL and all that kind of stuff. They had to take the screws out. They had to take bone from my femur, block up those old tunnels that were in there, and then put in a new ACL using my right hamstrings. So this time, for my third time round, they weren't able to use my own hamstrings, which is what they would normally do for an ACL reconstruction. They actually have used a donor graft from someone else.
Really?
Yeah.
I don't think I knew that.
Yeah, I mean, usually my understanding is that usually when the kind of second resort is to use your patella tendon, but there is a high risk that when they use your patella tendon that you will have anterior knee pain. Well, that's a risk of taking your patella tendon, which is kind of like part of your quads muscle. So the surgeon who I fully trust opted for a donor graft instead, because I didn't actually realize that this was a conventional. Didn't actually realize that was a conventional method, but he was confident that it would be eventually just as strong as a regular as a regular hamstrings graft. So went down that path. So yeah. It was interesting. It was a bit of a learning experience for me.
How do you become a hamstring donor?
I think I think the key is you're not alive. I'm pretty sure. I don't know. I'm pretty sure. So this is like, I suppose. So don't quote me on this. I don't actually know all the ins and outs. To be honest with you, I do. Yes. Well, I suppose it's kind of like, is it like organ donation? I don't know. I don't actually know. But yeah. So I'm assuming that is what it is. Yeah. So they effectively, they harvest. They can harvest things like that. So hamstrings. Oh my God. Please don't put me on this. Anyone that actually knows what happened, where these donor grafts come from, can you fact check that?
Are they dead or are they alive? You could just let us know.
Whoever gave me this one, I'm extremely grateful, honestly, because because I wouldn't have been able to provide my own provide my own hamstring.
Because I mean and my brain is now going, well, if it's a dead body that they're taking the muscle from, are they doing something to preserve it? In order to use it. I believe that there is
a process of which they, because I've had other, again, this is where you need my orthopedic surgeon in the chair. But there is a process with which they effectively prepare and preserve the donor grafts.
Yeah.
I think there's like a process of like, they like irradiate it, then they like freeze it and all sorts of things. But I believe that the process has like evolved over time. So it's become much more efficient, and it also preserves the actual integrity of the graft better nowadays than they used to. So my surgeon did mention that in America, they do it differently. In the past, they've done it differently where the graft does lose its integrity. And in that case, he wouldn't have recommended doing that.
Right.
But he was actually quite confident that the way that we do it in Australia, the way we prepare these donor grafts is much better now. And so, so here's hoping. So even though I've got a donor graft, what will happen is gradually that donor graft, so that whatever graft I would have had, whether it be my own or somebody else's, over the next kind of couple of months, that donor graft will actually the graft will get weaker. So the graft actually starts to kind of die off, and your own body goes in to like provide a blood supply and to actually like put a matrix around it. And so that's why with ACL injuries or ACL reconstructions, they take so long to rehab. Because effectively for the first 4 months, that graft is not mature. It's really weak. And so you can't just get back into sports. Not just because it takes time to build up your own muscle and things that you've lost over this time, but because the actual graft itself is not strong enough to withstand like forces of like running or whatever it is. So that's part of why it takes so long to rehab after an ACL reconstruction, because for the first like 6 months or so, the graft is actually your body is having
to heal that.
To strengthen it up, to actually basically like, create like a new, ACL, ligament effectively.
How on earth are we getting athletes back on the track, back on the field, like in such short amount of time?
Yeah, I mean, again, as a physio, this is also not necessary. This is not my specialty, not my field. So I'm sure if you had an ACL like guru here, they could tell you. I mean,
I mean, I can understand how you're strengthening everything around it, but you effectively can't. Like, is that strength really inhibiting like the force going through it? If you're like high jump. Force going through.
I mean, the actual the rehab is so important, because you need as much functional stability as possible, and that comes from your own muscles. But in terms of the actual maturity of the graft itself, my understanding that it's really only safe to go back, back to your sport, at the very least at like 6 to 9 months. And so if you're going before that, I don't know what they're doing.
Yeah,
I imagine that there is an inherent risk in that.
So I know you as a trail runner for a long period. That's where I would see you, where you would come in for treatment.
Yeah.
Tell us about how you got into trails.
Uh-huh.
Tell us about that.
Oh, okay. Do you know, I've innately, I suppose, always just been a runner, and not necessarily a long distance runner whatsoever. This is actually a funny story. But I did athletics at school. I was a sprinter. I had this really weird thing where even in my house at home when I was a kid, I'd literally I'd run everywhere in the house rather than walk. So,
gotta get to the other end.
Yeah, that's right, exactly. And I would just, I don't know, if I look back now, I was just always a runner. But I was never naturally like a long distance runner. And as I'm sure you have seen, you would have experience with, trail running is not a sprinting kind of sport. It is certainly, it is that kind of long distance. So definitely not a natural long distance runner. It was an absolute struggle. And I think I just enjoyed the fact that it was, it was a great way to move my body. And I felt really, got all the endorphins from it, and realized that it was also a really nice way to experience the world too. You can cover a lot of ground when you're running. And so that probably is what leads me into trail running.
A lot of ground.
Yes, it hasn't come with, a lot of struggle. So I suppose this is the serious part of it, is I just have a really spiritual connection with nature. And that's what honestly underpins a lot of what I do, and a lot of what has set me off on this trajectory in my life, and is a huge part of me and who I am, is spending time in nature. And that started with hiking, and that started with a friend of mine who literally one day after work said, "Eileen, do you want to come hiking with me?" And I'd always had a fascination with nature in my younger years through like poetry and literature, and I used to read a lot of stuff from, this is kind of where it gets deep. I used to read a lot of stuff by like transcendental like poets about nature and their spiritual connection with nature. And I think like intellectually accepted that nature was this beautiful thing. But it wasn't until my friend said, "Come hiking with me." And then I went on this hike with them. It was just like a hike up in the Adelaide Hills. And I just remember it was an epiphany. I finally got to interact with nature in a way that I had always dreamt in the poems and the literature, and I felt it that day. And it was just this this total transformation, and I just thought, this is my life now. And I think then that's just spiraled out of control, because then like I've been fortunate enough to now then hike like all over the world, in some of the most incredible and terrifying places. And for me, trail running was an extension. It was an extension of that. Trail running was like, oh, okay, I can see more of this in a shorter amount of time. without carrying as much on my back. So it was just it probably was sparked from just a practical thing. And then it has grown. It has grown from a love and that spiritual connection with nature. And I think, that's where it stemmed from.
I love that.
Yeah.
So, okay, let's go with the terrifying places, because I really want to know, like, how terrifying and what made them terrifying. Because you just said, when you're out in nature, you really feel it spiritually. You're really able to connect. So what made the places terrifying?
Well, I should also add to that we've been drawn to places that are notoriously hard to get to. It's like, why would you do that? Well, I think it comes back to, again, first of all, I think this is the feel-good part of it. Again, it comes back down to nature and trying to experience nature in its most raw and like wildest form. And so, I mean, I think if I reflect on why I escape to nature, I think of the pressures of just everyday life and of society, and how every day in our society it's there's so much focus on the individual. You have to hold on to your identity. It's about you making progress in your life, and there's so much focus on the individual. And when I escape to nature, that burden it disappears. You're out there on your own. Nature doesn't care if you're good at what you do, or it doesn't care about you as an individual. It is a completely unbiased, impartial, thing. And so when you're out there is no expectation. Like, you're stripped of ego, and it is an extremely refreshing thing to suddenly feel like you are free of that. And so when we go out to nature, we're drawn to places that are hard to get to, because they're as far from society as possible. They're as far from civilization, as possible, and all of those
and most
pressures.
Untouched.
Exactly. And so naturally, when you want to find places that are untouched and don't have as much infrastructure for people to get there, right? And they're hard to get to, which by extension then means that generally it's quite an adventure to get to those places. And I have to say, there's not much more that I find satisfying in my life than that feeling of, having trudged through, 8-10 hours a day of hiking, and then finally getting to a hut or getting to your tent or getting to your campsite at the end of the day, taking off your boots and just sitting there in just pure exhaustion, having just experienced beauty, but also hardship, but predominantly beauty. And you can just sit back there and appreciate it after you've worked for it. There's actually not much more in my life that I find more fulfillment in that feeling. And so there is certainly like a draw. The challenge is definitely a draw card. Like I really enjoy that. And I do want to drop this quote, because this quote for me, I think, is so valuable about going out into nature and having these tough experiences. And I'm probably not going to quote it word for word, but it's something along the lines of, at least once in your life, you should find yourself like in the most like rawest of human conditions, being out there facing the blind, deaf stone alone with only your hands and only your head. And that's how I feel out there. Like, nature can be so, I mean, it's unyielding. Like I said, it doesn't care about you as an individual. And so to be out there and to get through some tough spots, you are forced to change. You're forced to adapt because nature's not going to change for you. Yeah. Every experience has its own unique flavour to it. In terms of what I describe as what would I describe as terrifying? There have been times, I suppose, so I reflect on a time that we hiked on a remote island off the coast of Vancouver Island, which is off the coast of Canada, where we were dropped off by a float plane on this island. So really the only way of getting off the island was to hike to the other side and then get the float plane back out there.
Wait a minute. Okay. So you've landed on the water.
Yep. So we landed on the water.
Yep.
And they've gone, off you go.
Oh, wait.
We'll see you in.
Are you swimming? Are you boating?
No. They come up to the shore.
Oh,
they come up to the shore.
Okay.
But so they drop us off, and they go, we'll see you in a week on the other side of the island. And by the way, there's no one else on there aside from like right at the end, because there's actually like it's an Indigenous American settlement right at the end. So that's where we're hiking to.
Which is how far?
Oh, I can't actually remember. I think it was something like, could be like 80 Ks or something. Oh, so that's not, but over like several days.
Sure.
But he goes, oh yeah. So by the way, you do know, and we did know, but just hearing it was quite confronting. He's like, you'll see lots of bears and wolves out there, and it was kind of like, see ya, bye. And he was like, actually, I don't know, you might not see them, but they'll definitely see you. And I was just like, oh. I mean, especially having hiked a lot in places like Australia and New Zealand where, you know, like there's really no predators. You don't have like
maybe a koala.
You don't have like top tier predators, right? And so, I think that was definitely that was another level of terrifying for me, because I just never experienced, potentially being hunted by other predators. So it was really interesting. That was a learning experience, because we had to do things like figure out like which way the wind was blowing to know, like put our food, you know, obviously like downwind rather than, no, don't quote me on that again, so upwind rather than downwind. Anyway, you know what I mean.
I don't.
So it's like if the wind's blowing, you don't want the food to be like blowing over, like the scent of the food, like blowing over your tent.
Yeah.
Right. So
because it'll lead
bears to you. So there was like that realization of having to do those kinds of things, and then just like walking and seeing like huge like paw prints in the sand. And there was one day where we had to time the hike with the tide as well, because it was like if the tide came, because this was kind of on the coast, if the tide came in, you'd literally just be trapped like in a cove, so you wouldn't be able to then like progress to the next, like over the next spot. And one day we did rock up to a cove like later than we expected, and so the tide come in and effectively got us,
blocked you in.
Blocked us in this little cove where we just had to go, okay, well, this is where we're going to camp for the night. And of course there was like fresh bear scat like everywhere, and I doubt I slept a wink. That was a different level of, I never experienced having to hike with like predators.
Wild,
yeah, absolutely. So that was interesting, and thankfully, I'm sure they saw us, but we didn't actually see many of them. We didn't have any close encounters.
But did you have an encounter?
We saw a bear, or like a black bear in the distance. But
did you?
Like, aside from that, it wasn't real. Like, there was no confrontation. And to be fair, I mean, we had done our research beforehand, how to kind of deal with.
How do you deal with it?
Well, you are, with black bears, you are supposed to make a bit of a ruckus, that's if you're like within kind of some kind of closer proximity to them. But ultimately, what you are supposed to do is preventative strategies, which are just as you're walking, just to make a lot of noise. So I can't tell you how much shit I think we talked the entire time, just like shouting out just random things along the trail the entire, like literally just constant drivel of just nonsense just to make noise. Yeah. And so that's ultimately what you're supposed to do. Again, any survivalists out there, I'm happy to fact check that. Yeah, but yeah, make noise for black bears as you are walking on the trail, to give them as much notice as possible that you're coming, because black bears are often not as confrontational unless they're with, cubs or something like that. But yeah, make as much noise as possible, talk as much crap as you can. That was terrifying for that particular experience.
Spectacular though.
And I would be remiss to talk about one particular event where we effectively, this experience for me is by far the one that has been embellished over every single campfire and every campfire to come. This one would be remiss in talking about is we went. So I've been really fortunate to hike in New Zealand a lot, and this particular trip, one of my friends picked a spot for us to hike, which, to put into context, there's very little information about it. Our preparation and our research for this trip effectively required us to look up like other people's like YouTube videos from like years prior, and like sift through and try to find people's like blogs and like posts about this particular hike. Quite remote. And in preparation for this hike, again, we had to be dropped off at a certain location. And the only person, again, we found this through like obscure blogs, where there's one guy, this just regular old farmer dude, who you look up in the New Zealand white pages or yellow page, white, whatever it is, the one where and you look him up and you like call his home phone number and you go, can you drop me off at this place? He's the only guy that does this, like this trip with his boat, like his own personal boat, to drop you off at this spot. And you have to go over 2 big lakes to get to this spot. So once you're dropped there, there's no way back other than to hike to the destination and then get picked up by like a helicopter or something. Right? So my friend was like, this is a great idea. Perfect. And we were all like, we could do this. We've got this. This is going to be quite the adventure. And it was still the most harrowing experience. So we get dropped off by this guy.
Right. So we need details. So you're driving from the airport to this guy's place. How long is that? How far is the boat trip?
Okay. So we drive in our rickety old van that we pick up from the airport. It's the van it's like $20 a day, the cheapest van the cheapest, shittiest van that you can possibly imagine. We love it. It's the best. And we probably drive, I think, we've gotten into Queenstown, and you would drive a few hours out of Queenstown.
Around 3 hours.
Yeah, and then we get to this guy. He's a very reserved man. He gets us into the first boat. We've got all of our big packs on us. We're ready to go. Oh, I've missed a really critical part of this. When we when we fly into the airport, one of our group's rucksacks with literally every single thing that they needed for this trip did not arrive at the airport. So before we've even gotten out of Queenstown, we all literally spend an hour, and like shops are about to close. We literally go divide and conquer. Everyone go in different directions to find everything that this person needs. Yeah. So we literally went to stores to hire waterproof pants. We went to, because for this particular hike, it's like all the blogs are like, if you think muddy is muddy, this is muddier, right? Like, like prepare for that. There are like at least like 8 to 10 river crossings. It's like mud. So you can't just have hiking shoes, right? You can't just be like, oh, I'm just going to go do this in my sneakers. It's like, we were like, fuck, like my friend swore. They said, I don't know if I can say it. They said tabernac, which in Canada is like, that's bad. That's like worse. That's like 10 times worse than fuck. All right. So it was like, that's how bad the situation was at the time. We were like, we've literally organized this whole thing and this person now has no gear, and we just had to divide and cut. And we eventually got all these like bits and pieces together to make up this person's rucksack. So then we left. Sorry, that was an important part. So then we get there, and he gets us into the boat, and we make our way across the first lake. So that probably takes, I don't know, I can't remember all the days, but I think it was like half an hour trip across the lake. We get dropped off with like a little peninsula, and then we have to take another smaller boat like across the other lake. So he's got like two. So he's got
they're his.
Yes, they're both his personal boats.
Wow.
So he's the only person, like I said, that does this trip.
And are we talking a tinny? Like
it's a tin. So yeah.
Okay. So you can really only fit the four of
us in there. Yeah. So then we get dropped off at the start of this hike, and on the way, we're trying to have a conversation with this guy, and he's very, very reserved. And we remember we asked one particular thing was, hey, Vern, how's the weather been, the last few days? Just kind of sussing out, conditions. And he says to us, oh, yeah, you know what New Zealand's like. You know what it's like down here. And that's all he said to us. So that will be important later, because after we get dropped off, we hike a few hours into our first hut. And so it's a very short day, but effectively that short day is going to be followed by what we know is going to be the big day, which is a 10-hour day of like river crossings, and that's going to be the hard day. So we get to this hut and it starts raining, and then it doesn't stop raining for at least 30 hours. And we're talking, as Vern said, you know what it's like down here. It's like, well, we did kind of, but we didn't realize how. It's torrential plus. Like it was New Zealand rain, and it rained incessantly. And honestly, we probably really, we were very brazen in even wanting to start the next day. But we'd gone to so much effort to prepare for this thing. No one wanted to. Well, we didn't really know what other choice we had aside to just go for it.
Yeah.
And so it was extremely wet. We got ready in the morning. We're all a little bit, I was certainly feeling a little nervous about it, because of how wet it was. And so we started walking that second day of what we thought we knew was going to be the big day. And within 5 minutes, I was up to my chest in water. And this wasn't like this wasn't even one of the river crossings we had anticipated on the map. This was literally just the trail, and I was already up to my chest in water. And so you can have there's not enough waterproof gear in the world that's going to be good enough to keep you dry if you're up to your chest in water. So about a couple of hours in, I was already probably, like, in hindsight, like on the verge of hypothermia. Yeah. And one of my friends had like tripped and like fell backwards and like almost like had fallen off like a pretty sheer like cliff, and just got caught by like just these like branches underneath him, but he was literally hanging upside down and like just held by a few like spindly branches, and
off the cliff, like off the
off the side. Yeah. And then what effectively proceeded from that was we ended up over the next, so we spent 5 hours hiking, and this is where it does get pretty hairy.
Wait, so you kept going?
Of course,
That's
yeah,
fine.
of course.
5 minutes in, and you're chest high.
Yeah,
and you've now gotten to 5 hours.
Yeah, so we effectively then half swam, half like just like I was up to, at one point, like I was stuck in mud like up to my thigh, and I had the three of the guys like have to dig my leg out and like haul me out of that. So I don't know if I was by myself, like how I would have got out of that. I was literally like in quick mud.
Wait a minute. How does one get themselves in that much mud? Like,
that is a great question.
Are you wading through mud and it gets deeper and deeper?
Yeah.
Or is it like you fall in and
it was you couldn't, at this point, you couldn't discern where the trail was. It effectively was just like mud, water. You'd put your foot in and you could just like sink straight in, because you just didn't know how deep it was. So if you just slipped and you know, and we were trying to walk on what looked like solid ground, but sometimes it, like when you're exhausted as well, it's just like your footing starts to become a little bit more unsure. It's just hard to, it's hard to function. And so I managed to find myself thigh deep in mud. And I remember, like, as these guys were like trying to like pull me out, like we had three guys like literally like trying to pull me out of the mud, I could feel my hip just slowly dislocating. I was like, no, like just stop. And yeah, that was interesting. And so we ended up crossing like several smaller streams, which were like, at this point, because of how much rain had come through, they were like they were rapids. And I still have some like just insane photos from, you know, one of my friends just like taking a photo back at us, and the three of us are like trying to help each other get through like this white water rapid, looking very precarious. And then the crux of it is that we hiked like that for 5 hours, just like through, at the best of times, like knee deep mud. And we get to a river, which is now on the map. It was a significant river crossing, but once we got there, it was probably like, I want to say like 40, 50 meters across of just like white water. And we just hiked 5 hours, right? And we had another, at the very least, we had another 5 to 6 hours to go. And we were all exhausted. We all just wanted to just keep going.
Wow.
And I remember we were standing at the bank of this river, and two of our friends were adamant, we're gonna do this. Like, there is no way, like there's no option. at the time we didn't even consider the option of turning back. It was like we just have to keep going.
Yeah.
And one of them goes, okay, I'm going to throw this rope across to this tree, and if it reaches that tree, we're going for it. Like, I'm going to get the rope across there. I'll tie the rope on that. We'll all just shimmy our way across, and we'll make it across. And to this day, if that rope had reached that embankment or had reached that tree, I can tell you now, we probably wouldn't have made it back, because that water, the tons of water that was coming through that river would for sure have just taken whoever went first. Like, it was foolish. Yeah. So the rope didn't reach, which meant that we all sat on the bank for a moment and went, we really can't do it. But if it had, we would have tried, and I am 95% sure it would have ended in tragedy had we tried to. We totally underestimated how strong like that rapid was, and it didn't reach. So we sat there for a moment. I was, like I said, delirious, hypothermic, and the only option at that point was to turn back.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And we knew what we'd just gone through. And so it was a pride thing. It was oh my God, we can't do this. Like, I remember all those thoughts running through my head, and I was really delirious at the time because I was starving and I was hypothermic. And I remember saying to my friend, I was just like, in my very hazy state, I was like, oh, we'll be fine, guys. Like, let's just pitch a tent here. Can I just have a quick nap? And not a good sign if you're hypothermic, if you want to start to sleep. That's not good.
Yeah.
And I remember my friends literally were like, no, this is crazy, Eileen. And they took my clothes off me, dried me down.
Yeah.
And they did everything they could to keep me from not progressing with the hypothermia. And then we did. We ended up hiking back 6 hours back to the original campsite, and it hadn't stopped raining, so it was still raining. And so all the rivers that we had crossed already, everything was higher, everything was more flooded.
Wow.
There was one point where I will never forget, this is burned into my brain, was we had to swim across this lagoon, and we had heavy packs on our back. And what we ended up deciding to do was throw a rope across and tie the rope, and everyone just try to shimmy across the rope to get to the other side. And one of my mates went first, and he goes into the lagoon, and he, with the weight of his pack, he immediately flips over onto his back and starts sinking down.
Oh my goodness.
And I just remember, this to me, this person, this friend of mine is like my rock. He's the one who, when I go hiking and things get shit and things get scary, they're the one I look to give me confidence that we're okay. And for the first time in all the years that I've hiked with this person, I've never seen the look of fear on his eyes that I saw that day. And that image is still burned into my brain to this day of fuck, we're in trouble. This is bad.
Yeah.
And we made it across, but it wasn't without this intense realization of what are we doing? And then eventually we get back to the hut after, much relief, and say, we had to ration our barbecue shapes between the four of us. Had a small packet of barbecue shapes. I had one barbecue shape in. It's the best barbecue shape I've ever tasted in my life. And we get back to the hut, and we have to make contact with someone because they're expecting us to have got to the end. And so we prepared for a pickup at the end. And so we had this primitive like mountain radio. It was like this big. It was like a brick. And we were like, this is all we have to like make contact with anyone. So it was one of those classic old like, mountain radios where you have to like unravel the wires and like throw the one end of the wire like 20 meters out that way, and then like, 20 meters out that way, and just hope that you get a signal. So we made contact with it was honestly like, it was so surreal. We were all huddled in this like very primitive basic hut, really cold, really wet, all huddled around this radio and like shifting through the channels, just hoping for like, we're just getting static. We're like, fuck, we're not gonna get anyone. Like and then finally there's like a voice that, crackles onto the radio. It's like, oh my God. And we eventually get from them through to the helicopter company that was supposed to pick us up, and then they eventually come and pick us up.
The helicopter
the next day, yeah.
That's the most extraordinary story I've ever heard.
But honestly, they're not all like that. I've been to some of the most incredibly beautiful places in the world, and I love them all for their own reason. Yeah. But that one I had to share because I feel like my friends would be like, why did you talk about but no. Again, they're all learning experience, not what not to do. So if you start a hike and 5 minutes in, your chest deep in water, don't keep going.
Exactly.
Like,
turn back.
Yeah. That's right.
That's so incredible.
So what not to do 101.
I want to cover how you got into bouldering, because that's been a big part of your life in the last 12 months, maybe longer. And has been the reason for this
particular injury. Yeah.
So firstly, how does one go from trail running, because that's what you'd been doing a lot of, into then bouldering, and then like tunnel vision bouldering has set goals for yourself in that?
Yeah, look, I think it'd be remiss to, like, for me to mention that I transitioned into bouldering because I did a couple of ultras, but one in particular a few years ago, which was a really significant milestone in my life, and that was the Buffalo Stampede. And for me, that was an absolute game changer. Like, that was a game-changing event that I participated in. We can chat about that later, but that was a big thing. And for me, that was like a pipe dream fulfilled. That for me, I actually felt like I, at that point, for myself, had done everything that I wanted to do with ultras. It was that big for me. And it was actually a friend of mine who, in my, in this kind of goalless state, was kind of, come out climbing with me. And I was like, what is this bouldering that you're talking about? And they took me to an indoor bouldering gym in Adelaide. And I mean, as cliched as it sounds, the rest is history. For those that don't know or haven't bouldered before or don't really know much about bouldering, there is outdoor bouldering, there's indoor bouldering. Effectively, bouldering are short climbing routes that don't get too far off the ground, a few meters off the ground. Generally, you should have nice soft mat underneath, because there is a chance that obviously if you're falling without ropes and you're falling onto soft mats. And there is, they're short climbing routes. So there's a variety of problems, a variety of different levels of difficulty. Yeah, that's kind of bouldering in a nutshell.
So when you first did, or your first climb, what was it about it that took you?
Oh, I think there's a few things. I mean, it's a wonderful way to move. I love the physicality about it. You're suddenly like playing again. You feel like a child again. You know, if you think about, you know, climbing up your jungle gym or whatever it is, and you remember being in a playground, it's like that. And it's fun. It's like, is it exercise? I mean, it's exercising without feeling like you're exercising. And yeah, you feel like a child, you feel like you're playing, you're discovering all these new movements again that your body, like when's the last time you ever climbed something since you were, you know, 10 years old in a playground. So in that way it was just fun. It was just so much fun. But then as you get more entrenched in it, there's other things that I really love about it, which is that it's also it's a mental challenge very much of the time. So, you know, I think for those people that haven't done a lot of bouldering before or climbing before, it surprised me also how much of a like an intellectual activity it is as well, in the sense, or stimulating activity as well, in that there's a lot of problem solving. It's not just necessarily about, you know, strength and being, you know, having the physical ability to get from one hold or progress up a climb, but there's so much kind of technicality that's involved with it as well. So you're like learning about movement, which is really cool. And there's so much problem solving. You know, I'd find myself on some days, you know, thinking about not being able to do a climb, and then spending the next couple of days literally like just thinking about it, daydreaming and visualizing it, and like just excited to go back on that same project again and see if, you know, what I thought was right. So yeah, I think I really find it stimulating in that way too. And then the community is one, the culture that I've experienced within like my community of my climbing community is not, it has been so unique to me compared to any of the other sports that I've been in. I've never experienced going into a sport, and certainly an individual, what really is like an individual sport, and just getting like blind support from literally strangers and just anyone and everyone who's in there. I think that culture is a central part of climbing ethos. I'm not like a climbing aficionado, so I don't feel like I'm the person to kind of talk about like climbing history, but, you know, climbing did, as far as I'm aware, started off as a fringe sport and kind of a sport for dirtbags and outcasts, and that was all they had was climbing. And so there was always I believe that there was probably, like always a strong sense of community, and certainly there's the culture of supporting whoever's up on the wall is really strong. No matter who you are, or no matter if they're on the same project as you, you're just wanting to hype them to get them to the top or get to the next move. And I have honestly never experienced that level or that kind of support in any other sport in that same way.
It's interesting you say that, because coming from trail running, which I think is probably the next sport that is very community based.
Yeah, it is very community based. Absolutely. Yes. So I should say absolutely. I've experienced that. I have experienced a lot of support in trail running. Yeah. This is it's interesting. I think because I'm also, when I think of running, sometimes it is a very like it's you do it a lot on your own. Yeah. As well. And then when you have events and when you get together with your community, it is incredible. It is an incredible trail running community. Because you're always in the gym surrounded by people whenever you're doing it, you feel like you get a lot of
Yeah.
reinforcement every
Yeah.
time you go. It's interesting. It's really opened me up to that fear, to giving that support as well, because I've received so much, and it's helped me to thrive as a climber, to have this support and to have these connections. You realize that when you contribute to that, when you're also there supporting other people, you're contributing to this culture where like everyone's thriving, including yourself.
Yeah.
And that has carried through to other areas of my life as well, like into my work and I found that being that person who I never used to be, I feel like, I think in so many areas of our lives, we are conditioned to try to get ahead of other people in our work or sport or whatever it is when you're competing. And you're so used to the goal is to actually like get ahead of somebody else. And I remember, it's really easy to fall into that toxic, like, I don't want that person to succeed because I want to succeed. And I feel like climbing has actually helped me to truly feel like what it is to want someone else to succeed and to take myself like out of the picture and to be present in someone else's success. And it's not to say that I don't ever have any of those kind of toxic competitive feelings. Like but
being competitive isn't toxic.
True. Yes, true. But not wanting others to succeed is what I mean. And I really feel like climbing has helped me, at the very least, to show me and to demonstrate to me that you can contribute to a culture where you want everyone to succeed, and you can benefit from that. And that has carried through to other areas of my life, and it's been a really cool lesson to learn. Yeah.
Where have you seen, or where have you felt or seen the evidence of that outside of climbing? So you being supportive of someone else.
I think in lots of areas of my life. I mean, I think particularly, work is one, where, I genuinely feel like extremely proud of the achievements of some of my colleagues, and in supporting them and hyping them to get to where they are, you just build a better environment in your workplace. Yeah. And so I think that's a big one. And I think honestly, just like literally like in daily life, like I think a lot of just in general, like comparing myself with other people. And, I'm at a point in my life, a lot of my friends are having kids and, right now, like I've decided that like I'm not ready, or, and you see kind of people progressing in different ways, and sometimes there's like a pang of jealousy, like why I want that, or those kinds of things. And it just brings me back down to something my psychologist actually said once to me when we would try to deal with all this, like trying to deal with this internal dialogue. And it just brings you back to everyone is on their own path. And I actually feel that that's quite synonymous with how climbing is, in a way, just to bring it back to that, because everyone has their own project. Yeah. Everyone has their own struggle that they're working through.
Exactly.
And so, yeah, why not support them, know?
I think that's so important and lovely to hear, because, yes, you're right. I would think, this is just opinion based on what I've seen, like with today's society, with social media, it is always one-upping someone or putting this facade or best version of yourself, or whatever it is. I think bringing it back to supporting everyone around us, because you're right, we've got no idea. We see 1% of someone's life.
Yeah.
You know, whether it is through these face-to-face contact or whether it's through social media, whatever it is, it's 1% of what someone's going through. We just don't know.
Yeah.
So I think that's so beautiful and valuable to hear. You have, in what it looks like to me from the outside, achieved so much in such a little time of being in a sport, I think, and obviously the people around you would know better than what I do, but from an outsider's perspective who doesn't know much about the sport, it looks like you've come so far and you are very good at what you do. Having said that, now with this injury, and I know you had some pretty big goals for this year.
Yeah.
Where's your mindset at with the injury, what you've achieved in a short amount of time and going forward for this year?
Oh, okay. Where do I start? So I have already, have learnt a lot from this particular injury about risk management into the future. So if I ever get back to climbing, which I hope I hope
you get back
when I get back to climbing, I have learnt a lot from this injury, and I'm not beating myself up about it, but I also feel that how the events that I feel have led to this happening have taught me some important lessons. In terms of mindset, I certainly I feel that I'm really intent on on making this whole thing a better experience moving forward, because I don't want it. I don't want myself to go back to the hopelessness that I felt all those years ago when I did this side. And so over the years, with a lot of help and reflecting on what happened this time, I'm intent on making changes to my rehab this time that I didn't have before, those resources that we talked about that I didn't have before. So I think the first thing I would say with respect to mindset is I'm going to trust this process moving forward. I do have incredible professionals around me who are guiding my rehab, and I am going to do what they tell me to do. The other thing as well is I am going to make a concerted effort to look after my mental health through this, because injuries suck. Injuries really suck, and it has come at a time in my life where I felt like I was peaking with climbing, or not peaking, but at least like I was making the progress that I, had worked for in climbing. And it is hard to suddenly lose that. Yeah, it's hard to suddenly lose that. And so I can recognize the signs with my mental health. I can put into place things that will help to make sure that I'm doing everything, like I said, in my control to make sure I look after my psychological as well as my physical health moving forward, because I know how important that was last time and I didn't have the resources for that last time. So I've made sure I've got my psych on board, who, even though I don't necessarily even feel like I need to see her at the moment, I still have her there just to check in. I have made plans for things that I want to do, and aside from just the knee rehab, the other things that bring me joy that I do want to get done over this time, that I always complain that I don't have enough time to do when I'm training or whatever. So putting in and also making sure that I'm still staying very much still nurturing the network around me that were there for me that caught me this time when I fell, as in metaphorically. and making sure that those relationships are still as strong as possible, because that's going to be so important for me moving forward. And again, something I didn't have the last time. When I get back to climbing, I think there are some important lessons, like I said, I've learnt from this injury. I can tell people what not to do. You know, the events effectively leading up to this injury, I was extremely fatigued. I'd done 3 days in a row. I was pushing myself really hard on a particular move, throwing myself at it again and again. I've recognised after the fact that I had really, again, quite my internal dialogue was quite self-critical. So when I was pushing myself on this particular move, I was thinking to myself the entire, I was in my own head then and going, and this is, not necessarily all the time. This was on the day. I kept thinking to myself, you should be able to do this. Others can do it. You should be able to do it. There was this really, what I would describe as quite unhelpful dialogue at the time. And I think it's ultimately what compelled me to keep pushing on a move that I wasn't making much progress with. And other people might have just stopped and stepped away going, okay, we've had enough for today. Let's come back and look at this later, or, looked at it a little bit more constructively. But I can now recognize that internal dialogue was something that contributed to my actions that day. And so I read something really interesting actually a few days after my surgery that just popped up on social media, and it was someone talking about climbing and about how hubris, or like the lack of humility, can often lead to like poorer outcomes in climbing. And they talked about how when we don't have, and he talks about it as humility, the humility to recognize our own weaknesses, and we externalize or we put our blame on other things, that we aren't being humble, we aren't respecting that we have weaknesses that we need to work on. And that day I do feel like that actually that resonated with me about what happened that day. Because if I think about my dialogue that day and how I just kept telling myself, I should be able to do this, I should just keep being able to throw my body at it, and I should be able to do this, and certainly not being in the present and going, okay, well, either we try to deal with this constructively, or step away from it and work on this, that I can't do this, I need to go away and figure out why, or work constructively on this. That really resonated with me that day. And I very much feel like moving forward, I want to work on that internal dialogue and, learn from this experience.
I follow a influencer on she's a fitness influencer turned business influencer, and she said, I forget, it was a very long time ago that I saw this, and I'm like, oh, that's so good. She goes, we really need to stop shooting all over ourselves.
I like
it's one of those things where as soon as I say that, I'm like, wait a minute, what should I, like, is this actually a thing that's is this ego, or and
it takes the like responsibility out of it, I think, because in a sense is how I feel, because it's that putting that responsibility on like external factors, like, yes, I should be able to do this, but are you taking responsibility for doing it? Like, I don't know. That's kind of how I
or and like, why do you have that perspective? Like, where does that come from? Is this via conditioning from someone somewhere, some experience, and is there truth in it?
that you should be able to do
Yeah.
something, or that you should, like,
Yeah.
where's the evidence that you should?
Yeah.
Like, you've never done this climb before. Why should you be able to do it?
Exactly.
And it's funny because I think, you know, you said in the beginning that you have this spiritual connection with nature, and never would you go out in nature and expect to do something like that and go, I should be able to do this.
Mm-hmm.
Like, because you've got a healthy respect of nature, your ability, and marrying the two. So I think it's super interesting of that lesson for you, and
that's a good
forward.
application of it. Yes, it is a good lesson for me.
You're amazing, and I think you're extraordinary, and I hope that you will begin to see that also.
Those are very kind words, and right back at you. You are amazing. So thank you for having me. That's like I said to you, I feel I feel honoured that you would even contemplate asking. So thank you. It's so lovely to chat to you.
That was Eileen Ting. If you are not watching this on YouTube and you want to check out some of the extraordinary adventures, Eileen was so kind to give me some footage and some photos of her adventures, so they are put into the video as well. So if you want to check that out, make sure you go over to YouTube and watch this episode. Thank you so much for listening today. If you enjoyed this episode and have other adventure junkies that you think would really love to hear this episode, please share it with them, or review this episode, or subscribe, because all of that helps this podcast keep going really strong. As always, I appreciate you. Thank you so much for tuning in today. Have the best day, week, month, and year. Stay awesome. We'll catch you next time.